Welcome to D&D.
Not that D&D.
I'm Eller, the Disciple.
And I'm Tally, the Dissenter. Today, our episode is going to be about myth.
I think we should probably level set, first of all, just with a definition of myth, because I think for some people, the word myth means the same as not true. And the definition that I will give it comes from kind of a couple of different sources that I'm kind of conglomerating together, if you will. The definition of myth, mainly from Webster, to be fair, a traditional but unverified story that gives reason for a current custom, belief, or fact of nature. And I will tell you, when I was taking my theology classes, it was very helpful to have that definition, because the word myth, really, I did equate that as false. It's just a story, a false story. And I really love this definition where it's really an understanding that it's a story. Mm-hmm. It's a story. And sometimes, another definition that I saw is it's a story that conveys a truth. So not necessarily that the story is true, but conveys a truth. And that also is very helpful in having that perspective. So I hope that helps our listeners,
Watchers.
And watchers.
And whatever.
It's whatever however you're listening or hearing us.
However you're participating in this form of media.
There you go.
But what would you say is different between myth and like a fable? A fable is a story meant to convey some sort of lesson.
Well, I think that they can be similar and it's okay. I mean, I don't know that it has to be. I mean, a fruit is a fruit, but there's also other words for fruit.
Like an orange is a type of fruit.
Yes, exactly.
The reason that I wanted to kind of talk about this, I think it was great that you gave us a starting point. And I know that I've watched a lot of different creators in this realm of atheism, deconstruction, all that sort of thing, that I just really want to ask you some questions that I feel like people will probably want to know the answer to. For you, if you hear the story of like Leda and the Swan, please do you know that story?
No, I don't know that story.
I will keep it brief. I'm not going to tell you the whole thing. Much of Greek mythology can pretty much be summed up to Zeus cannot keep it in his pants. Unfortunately.
Remember, I'm Ace.
I know. But the story of Leda and the Swan, I don't know that there's a lesson to be learned there, where essentially Zeus makes a move on Leda, or Leda, I'm not sure I'm saying it correctly, but she rejects him, and he transforms himself into a swan and sneaks into her room that night to take advantage of her while she's asleep.
Oh my God, this is a terrible story.
There are many, many of those in Greek mythology in general. But to be honest, there are very violent stories in the Bible as well. So,
that's fair.
But if I look at a story like that, I don't think that the lesson we're supposed to learn from that is that we shouldn't let swans into our house.
So here's what I would say about that story then, if that's what your question was.
This kind of just made me think of it.
Does it have a truth? I don't know what that truth is. But does it do one of the other pieces of the definition, like explain a custom, or
maybe I would have to do a little more research on that. I'm not sure.
Like a belief of some sort.
Maybe they don't like swans in Greece.
Because I know, when I think about the Greek mythology as compared to like the stories of the Bible, there are some people that do not see the Bible as, the truth, God's inspired word. I don't get hung up on that. I still think, especially the stories of the New Testament, are lessons about what it means to be human, and that Jesus models great ways to show empathy and to connect with one another and to do justice. And maybe he's not perfect. I don't know. That's all up for debate. I think it's a beautiful example of what it means to be human. And those parables that he tells, the stories that we have of his relating with crowds, they do share a story that helps to explain why people believe certain things. And for me, I would even say my beliefs are measured against those stories on a regular basis. So that as I've moved from a place of very conservative thought when it comes to Christianity to a much more progressive thought, use those stories to measure against and say, wait a second, nowhere does Jesus say anything about getting in people's business about what they do in their bedroom. Okay? And that started making me change my mind about things. And so that's, some people would call it myth. And I'm okay with them calling it that. I don't call it myth personally. I just think it's a beautiful book of stories, and it would probably take another whole book to explain what I consider it. So I won't even go there.
Oh, maybe someday, huh? In the pipeline.
Yeah.
But I mean, I feel like kind of my point of bringing that up was really just trying to establish like an understanding of where we find value. And I would say that if you're looking at stories in general, some stories are going to be more valuable than others. I feel like there are definitely even stories that have been based on true events that I have seen that have been like, I don't see why I've watched, an hour plus of this story. It doesn't, just because it happened doesn't make it good or interesting. There's nothing here to learn. There's no value to be gained by spending my time that way. And I mean, I think there's one really good Aesop fable that I like that is like, now I can't remember the specifics, so this could be wrong. I'm just kind of generally summarizing. But an animal falls down the well. I think it's a wolf falls in a well and is trying to climb up and can't get up. And the fox comes by and says, "Oh gosh, I am so sorry that you were stuck down there." And the wolf responds, "Well, you could help me out instead of just feeling bad for me." And I like that story a lot because when I look at like, we don't necessarily have social systems to help people that, particularly in the United States, I know that other countries have somewhat better safety nets than we do. But I look at that and I find value in that story. Now, I can say that there are definitely some stories in the New Testament that I would find value in, but there are also a few stories in the New Testament that I don't particularly care for. There's a very capitalist story in the New Testament that Jesus tells about the servants that are given the gold and the master chastising the one who didn't make him more money. And I'm like, oh, well, that is definitely somewhere I would not align with this. And this is why I also think some people have an issue, even if they, think, oh, okay, Jesus was a prophet that existed and, really focused on telling these stories and kind of brought this new perspective or probably wasn't the first person to give that perspective, but became very popular. Now, in saying that, I feel like that he would say something that I would go back and look at my values and say, I don't know that this is going to align with my values, because I do not believe that the purpose of us as humans is to make more money for other people. I sit there and go, I know that myself and others might say, okay, well, how can you be fully human and fully divine and still have things like this that don't make a lot of sense, or at least in my perspective aren't at its core loving. So I mean, I have those questions. I also think you're going to have people who want to know what makes your myth more important than anybody else's myth.
Well, first of all, I did not say that my myth is more important.
I know you didn't.
But I think that's a really important question, and I think it's a really important thing that on two levels. One, acknowledging that there are people out there that somehow prioritize what they believe over what somebody else believes.
Mm-hmm.
And then second of all, that there are also people who go, you know what? There's a lot to say about the phrase live and let live. And love and let love, and be and let be.
Mm-hmm.
Because the truth is, even when we have very core values and beliefs, a lot of times we don't live 100% into them anyway. And it really is kind of an armoring thing. I'm going to steal some verbiage from Brene Brown again, because she's one of my favorite authors.
You don't say.
Well, you know that, but they don't know that. So now they know it. But it's an armoring thing to say, oh, I can't live into everything and I'm less than, and I can't face that and own that. And so therefore it's easy for me to just ignore that and take that internal conflict, if you will, and externalize it by pointing to other people and how they're not living a certain way or whatever. And I absolutely reject that way of being, while at the same time live in the contrariness of being guilty of doing that. So,
well, no one's perfect. We all,
I'm definitely not perfect.
On occasion, pass judgment.
Yeah.
And it's something that I think we should work on to just try and do better. Because that's immediately what I think of, is just judgment of others.
Well, and then the flip side of judgment is, if you make allowances for others, I think in part it almost begins with being gracious and generous to yourself in the first place. Of like, oh, I don't like this thing about myself, but I can accept that it is a reality, and I can keep a more gracious attitude towards myself. And then I don't need to go out and judge and finger point at other people, because I'm being kind to myself. So it's easier for me to be kind to others. I do, getting back to your point of the story, I just want to make a couple of points. One, we have to realize that there are some stories that have been purposely mistranslated. So I would love to go back to the translation and know what that story actually is. Second of all, I have slightly a different read, although I do kind of see your point about the capitalism. I do see that. And I don't love every story either, just to be fair. But I have a slight different read of the idea that if we have gifts, we have some responsibility to develop those gifts. Imagine someone who can play the piano amazingly because they have been given a special gift and they don't want to use it. And to be fair, it is their option.
Yeah.
But what a sad thing that the world missed out on. So I struggle with that.
You know, this is making me think of Scanlan and what do we owe to each other?
Yeah.
Do we really owe someone the hearing of our gifts? I don't know. I feel like that could maybe be a whole other episode, so I don't want to get into it.
It really could.
I don't want Yeah.
But I wanted to leave room for sometimes, and again, depending on if the translation's even accurate, because you look at there's other stories, and you have to. I love the idea, and I've used this in some of my preaching, is the best commentary on the Bible is the Bible. So you take one story and you measure it against another to make sure that they really are are they congruent? Are they consistent? Is the message there? And if it's not, then maybe it's a misinterpretation or an incorrect translation of the Bible.
Who was it that decided to make Mary Magdalene a sex worker? Because from my understanding is that came later, that was like added in at some point.
And I've heard that before. Matters. So yeah, I think overall, again, the story in some ways was this idea that Jesus hung out with the wrong kind of people, and the synagogue leaders didn't like it, or the leaders of that time didn't like it.
Yeah, I mean, I think also, I feel like in some ways I do worry about anti-Semitism, not intentional anti-Semitism, but accidental, secondhand, because we're contrasting what Jesus believed against the Jewish leaders of the time. Yeah, it's just, I don't know. Obviously, these are very tough conversations. These are very tough because they're super nuanced. There's so much information. There's not a simplicity there. There's not a easy answer. And the reality is, we like easy. And I think that's why some of our myths and our stories persist. It's because we can sum up maybe a more complex idea in a shorter way, or we word it in a way that we can teach it to our children, or convey it to somebody who maybe has a hard time kind of understanding just in a more complex way. So I feel like there's a reason why our myths persist, and why we see them in cultures all over the world.
I would tell you I was a little nervous coming into this conversation because I wasn't sure what you were going to ask me. And I've liked the direction it's went. I think that the people are seeing that you and I are definitely have kind of different perspectives.
Oh, yeah.
But we can amicably talk about this and have our different perspectives and still find some common ground. And to some degree go, at the end of the day, we don't have to see it the same to still have a really awesome relationship. And that's what we want for you guys, is to be able to do that as well.
And good conversations.
Great conversations. I love our conversations.
This comes from a long time of us working on our relationship. I don't think that it's something that you get to overnight. I think that, I don't know. When we first talked about this episode, it seemed like you were thinking I was trying to attack you by asking you, hey, why is this important to you? Yeah. And why is this why these myths over other myths or fables or whatever you want to label it? But I was like, my first question to you was like, why do you think that's my intention? Like, maybe you need to reframe what you think my intention is. Not that I don't want to get into the impact versus intent conversation. I'm specifically talking about like us as our relationship. Yeah. I think when you get into the larger framework outside of more intimate relationships, then I don't know. I want to know, what else do you want to say about this specific topic? I want to encourage people to, if there's something we don't talk about specifically related to myths or questions they might have, for you in your particular, obviously, story. I know Greek stories mostly, and a few of the Roman stuff, but not very much, and then a lot of the Norse stuff, because I find the Norse mythology
we love Thor, let's face it.
I love Chris Hemsworth.
There you go.
I like looking at him. That's about, well, and he can be funny, so I like laughing. So yes, there's that.
Like that.
We like a himbo. But that is not the point. Stop distracting me. But I like a lot of the Thor, like, oh my god, you got me so, like, I like the Norse stuff. I've told you, one of my favorite Norse stories is the story of Loki's kids, and I don't know how to explain this briefly. Loki had kids with somebody, and they were not humanoid necessarily. One of them was a giant wolf. And Fenrir, Odin got a vision that Loki's kids were going to be the reason why Ragnarok happened.
And very different than the movie.
Oh, yeah. I mean, the Marvel took a lot of liberty. But
I like the movie.
So because of that, Odin tries to capture all of Loki's kids, and Fenrir the wolf is taken. Essentially what happens is, the short version of it is, Odin is kind of a jerk to his kids in general, but Tyr gets his hand bitten off by Fenrir because of Odin. And then the long and the short of it, because I don't want to go into the whole details, highly recommend if you're interested in mythology though, is that Odin's actions bring about Ragnarok because of what he does to Fenrir. And if he had not done those things, then the prophecy might not have come true. So it's just a really interesting, like, you bring it upon yourself kind of story. And I like that. And again, I find value in this. There's this lesson here of, like, how we treat other people and how we interact with the world, and being so afraid to hold on to power, which is something we sort of have spoken about before, and how you kind of deal with that stuff. And I feel like there are so many sources out there. Obviously, I'm mostly familiar with, like, the white Western stuff, because that is often what we're told, and often what we see in our media, that can add value. So it's like, what is it for you that makes the Bible more valuable than other stories, other myths?
So I would say a couple of things. One, those myths were something I learned like 6 months in school. Okay. Going to church and hearing the stories of the Bible were a different whole experience, and, you know, woven throughout my life. The Greek stories that I heard, because I took a Greek mythology class, okay? That class, it really did feel, and I kind of feel like this might be repeating what I said before, it really did feel like, okay, well, those gods are just weird, and they're just very selfish beings, right? Whereas,
I mean, to be fair, in the Bible, God did kind of kill a whole bunch of people.
But okay,
a lot of times.
Yeah.
No, well,
so
Joe, just saying.
You're assuming that God really did that, right? The way the stories were written, God did that. That might have been a limitation of our understanding. And again, using, like, almost ascribing an action to God because something happened. Not necessarily because God really did it, but because, well, this happened, so God must have done it. And I think that's a very fine line, but I think that it's kind of like, if you've ever heard the parking angel stories where somebody got a nice parking spot and they said, oh God, my parking angel helped me. They just got lucky and got a good parking spot. It's okay. We don't have to ascribe that behavior to God. If you want to and it makes you happy, I'm not going to begrudge that to you. But on the other hand, we really don't know that that's what happened.
I'm so sorry. This is definitely making me think of, like, the opposite of that. Of ascribing when bad things happen to God.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So, like,
absolutely. Well, and then when you say that, it's this, I feel like that has almost been directly refuted by one of the stories in the New Testament with Jesus, where he sees a leper and he's talking to people and he said, you want to ask me who sinned? And he's saying nobody. It just happened. And it was like, almost like, he doesn't say it just happened, but that story is kind of like, nobody sin to make this happen. The stories in the Bible for me have a different, and for me personally, a higher value, to use your word, because there are things that I can relate to that help me to see God not as a selfish being, but as a compassionate being. Jesus as a compassionate human. Overall, I would, to allow caveats for the weird capitalist story, because it's totally there.
Well, and I think that one of the first questions that people get, and I feel that I still have not heard a satisfactory answer for, and I know this is something we've talked about previously, the shorthand version of what they call it is the problem of evil. And that is reconciling a God who is supposed to be all loving and all good and all compassionate, but gives children, who allows, not gives, but allows children to get cancer, or allows like all these things to happen. And the idea that if this is a God who is truly fully loving and fully caring and fully able to do something, why would you just sit there? Because as somebody who works with unhoused populations currently, I had a rough morning recently where I was talking to somebody about job placement and trying to figure out what they needed for job placement, and the response was, I need a house. And I'm like, I know I can't give you a house because people will just give houses to people who don't have houses. And I'm like, and it's endlessly frustrating. And it's like, if I had the power, the ability to do that, why would I not end that suffering? Mm-hmm. And I do think that that is something, again, I've never heard a response that at all justifies that to me.
Yeah, and I can't say that I'm going to give you that. This life is difficult. And whether you see a God that's loving and don't understand and live with the mystery of like, well, then why don't you stop these horrible things? Or whether you choose to reject any God at all, life's going to be hard, and you're going to have questions that,
I guess my thing is,
don't have answers.
How do you reconcile the mystery of somebody not doing something and not see that as evil? Because again, you have the power and ability to do something and you do nothing.
Well, first of all, I challenge the idea that I really think I understand God, because I just flat out don't. Mm-hmm. That's the first thing. And anybody that thinks that they do has put God in a box that is very small. I just don't put God in that box. And so that means that on the flip side of it, I don't ask God to solve famine, because maybe that's something I'm supposed to be helping to solve.
Yep, you're definitely not going to be able to give me a suitable answer.
No.
Because
well, I told you that right from the start.
I know, I'm just saying, I still am looking for anyone who can justify letting people starve, letting people die in the cold. I mean, I see, like, and maybe evil is the wrong word, but I see someone like Elon Musk or Jeffrey Bezos who have the ability and resources. Well, maybe not Musk so much because he's a terrible businessman. I didn't say that.
You have to cut that out.
Do we have to? I mean, everybody knows that Twitter is bombing, but but I look at people like that who have this resources to solve these problems, and they don't. Mm-hmm. And there's kind of two ways. You can say, oh, they're evil, or you can just say they're just so selfish. They cannot care about anyone else. And I don't know. I think maybe some people make the argument that that's a form of evil. I don't know that I don't know. I struggle with the concept of evil in some ways. I feel like it's a myth. We talk about it in a way to describe things that happen or things that are horrific, because we don't have other words for that. I mean, I think of someone being so selfish where they cannot even care that someone is starving. Does that make them evil, or does that just make them uncaring? Or could you say that that selfishness is evil, even if it's not intentional evil? I mean, we think about implicit bias that we don't like in DEI training and stuff. You're working on trying to unlearn those things. I don't know that I would say that you're not racist just because you're trying to be anti-racist. You grew up in a racist society.
Yeah.
So we grow up in an evil society. I don't know. These questions are complex and they weigh heavy on the soul.
And
or heart or mind. I don't know. I'm like, I don't
all
even
of
know
the above. All
whatever
of the above.
terminology you care to use.
All of the above. So I think sometimes we have to think about, why are we asking that question? Do we just want this problem to go away?
Yes.
And really, maybe what we're doing is being called to do our part to make it a better place.
Does that make them evil or selfish? Or
well,
what
and I think
does that
evil,
make them?
Why do you need to judge that?
I think it's just because there's this overwhelming sense of like helplessness.
You should talk about that.
That I feel with these situations. Because I see people who have the resources, who have the ability to do something, and they do nothing. And I am just trying to pay my bills, you know?
Right.
And it's so endlessly frustrating. And it's not about necessarily, I'm not trying to judge them. I'm just asking the question of, do we define that as evil? The ability to do something and you do nothing.
But isn't that a judgment by defining it that way?
Well, what else would we do? I mean, how else do we understand our place in the world? Even if, because I took away completely the humanity. If we just have somebody who's capable of doing something that helps someone else, and they do not do it, what do we call that? Is it just selfish? Is it evil? What do you do with it? Because this is just about understanding our place.
I think at the end of the day, the question is, rather than asking if they're doing what they should be doing, is asking ourselves, are we doing it?
But I told you I was taking away the people. I was taking away just straight up, just somebody has the ability to do something that could help someone else, and they do not do it. Doesn't matter who it is. Irrelevant.
Yeah.
If it's me, if it's you, if it's Jeff Bezos, if it's, like, that's not the point. If it's something that you're like, okay, I feel like I need to let the person make the choice. You look at somebody who has severe mental health issues and no access to services for that. What about that situation where it's like they are not making choices because they're in their, like, they are unable to make clear choices?
Mm-hmm.
What do you do with that? Is it not our responsibility to do more?
I think it is our responsibility when it's in our power. And the fact is sometimes it's not in our power. And
then in that case, why is it our responsibility and
not God's
if he has the power or they have the power?
Because for God to exert that power destroys our free will. And God uses a different power to influence people, to help people, is how I view it. But nobody knows that answer.
Nobody knows the answer. I know.
Well,
And I have tried in my lifetime to make peace with not knowing everything, even though I know I would love to know everything because I like to learn and I am curious. But I have tried to make peace with that. And this is just something that I admit I struggle with every day.
and I think that's fair. I'm not going to say I don't struggle with it too. I just have made my peace with not understanding.
I know we got a little sidetracked. That is gonna happen probably every single episode. Which honestly,
did we mention we have ADHD?
Yeah. But I think that some of the thing that's nice about this kind of conversational thing is that you are seeing how we deal with these situations.
Yeah.
And I needed a break a minute ago. So I got up and walked away for a second. And we came back and we're fine. It's all good. And it's not even like the tension wasn't even about us. You know, it was something else entirely. So
yeah, I mean,
and that's okay too. It's okay to say you need a break when you're
yes,
mad at something else that has nothing to do with this, like that, or
absolutely,
that isn't the other person's fault, or whatever.
Well, and sometimes when you have different perspectives, there's just there you do need that break. You do need to just step away and go, okay, maybe I'm asking the wrong question, or I'm answering the wrong question, or it is an unanswerable question,
or it's a triggering thing that you're just like, why injustice? Which is almost my default setting at this point.
Yeah.
So,
yeah.
I don't want to end on like a sad thing. I don't want to end on a bad note. I feel like,
and we're not.
No,
I don't think so. I think that people are seeing your heart and know that you care about justice.
No, put it back.
And we both do. It's a matter of just continuing to think about what it means to be human, what it means to be a person of faith, what it means when we can't know, because knowledge is not faith. Mythology, even if it really happened, I read somewhere that the Troy mythology is totally considered a mythology, and yet there are pieces of it that have been identified as historical. That was interesting.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, I was like, I have to do more research to actually talk any more than that. But in preparing for this episode, that was something I came across. Sometimes there's just questions we can't figure out, and science is never going to figure it out either, even though it's nice to have science. So, with that being said, I hope whatever the next few days hold in store for you, few or several, until you're with us again, you'll have the strength you need for each day, and faith when you need it, faith, and if you don't need it, that's great, and hope, and lots of love and joy in your life.
I know that we did kind of take a different route with this. We didn't totally stay on topic mythology. So if there's anything like in particular that you want to ask a question about, please put it in the comments, like the video, share, subscribe, do all the things, click all the buttons, anything to help us out. So thank you for sitting with us today, and we will see you next time.
Bye.
Hi, welcome. I want to apologize. We had been saying that there was going to be a podcast up. We had only gotten one episode up. There were some technical difficulties, so hopefully everything is fixed now, I believe, so that we're posting all the episodes to get caught up. So the 4th episode should be going up today. so that we are in line. All right. Thanks for listening and watching.